leading children about in a particular way. So if I may, I'm just going to read, we start from Psalm 119. So this is Psalm 119, verses 9 to 16. How can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your word. I seek you with all my heart. Do not let me stray from your commands. I have hidden your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Praise be to you, O Lord. Teach me your decrees. With my lips I recount all the laws of your commandments. I rejoice in following your statutes, as one rejoices in great riches. Meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. So, Lord Jesus, I just want to thank you for every single blessing here. Please speak to us in this time together. Please give me clarity. Help us all to understand the times and how we can protect our children and young people and help them to stay pure and to walk in your ways. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for coming. It's amazing to see so many of you on the Monday evening, rainy evening at that. So before Steve and I try to answer your questions, I may need to just do two things, maybe in about 25 minutes, half an hour, to think about things from this issue of education from the perspective of Bush Legal Centre, where I work as centre manager. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about particular issues facing Christians in education, and then talk to you about your rights as parents and what you can do at the moment when it comes to what is happening in your schools. So if I have the next slide. So I hope you can see. Okay, thanks, Vivian. So I don't know, probably a lot of you probably know of Andrea, Steve and I work for, who founded Christian Concern. And she knew the importance of the law in a nation, and that law is often downstream of culture. Although it sometimes also influences the other way, heavily in the direction of culture. Either way, it plays a fundamental role. So maybe that's something you can think about a bit. Does law come first or does culture come first? It often operates in both directions. But she realised there was a need to tackle both culture and law. And so our work at Christian Concern helps people to take hold of God's promises, such as this one up here in Romans 1:16 and 17. I know that you'll echo that. So we believe as Christian lawyers working in the legal centre that we're called to be what we describe as watchmen on the walls. And so our clients are people of faith, and many of them have got into difficulties because of the faith exams that they've taken, often in the workplace. And most of our clients don't make the national news, some of them do. But we serve faithful Christians like yourselves who are having difficulty with the increasingly secular culture that we live in. So our service is like the NHS, so it's free at the point of need, and it relies entirely on faithful donors up and down the country to fund it. So our topic for this evening, what could be more important than the nurturing and educating of the next generation? It's a question that's very close to our hearts at Christian Concern, and that's why quite recently, we engaged Steve as our head of education to take this work forward. And as with other areas in which we work, there's quite a crossover between us at the Legal Centre and the other departments. So we have many calls every month from parents anxious about the material their children are being taught at school, as well as being contacted regularly as well by those who work in schools and asking for help. So what are the issues that are facing Christian parents and those who work in education? So I just divided it into just 4 areas to briefly mention. So the first one is sex education. So there's currently great concern about material that's being taught in schools under the banner of sex education. Miriam Cates MP has been taking up the cudgel with great effect on this in Parliament recently. You may have seen her speaking. There's an influential movement that's going on that's known as sex positive, which introduces inappropriately sexualized material to young children. And of course, there's the ongoing and relentless pushing of LGBT plus XXX material, and material on gender identity that's being pushed in education settings. So here you can see a few examples. There are a few examples of some of the books which we've seen are being used and read, in particular to primary school children. That's the next one. So there's a vast array of providers of sex education materials. And you can see the examples of them up there. They're mainly created and delivered by activists. The schools are paying people to come in and indoctrinate children. And this is really starting to happen since a couple of years ago, when sex education was made compulsory in secondary schools. So here is Calvin and Nikki Watts. They're just an ordinary couple in South America. They got in touch with us last year when a particular book was being read to their 7-year-old daughter at their Church Logan primary school. And the book that Calvin and Nikki objected to was called It Feels Good to Be Yourself. You can see the cover of it up there. So along with many other similar books, it was being used to indoctrinate children into believing that they have an inner gender identity, which may be other than their biological sex. So apart from being entirely unscientific, these ideas are actually based on very stereotypical ideas of sex and gender. That princesses, brooks and ponies for girls who should dress up in pretty dresses, and climbing trees and fighting is what boys should do. And if you're one of those and you don't like the things that are supposed to be the things that your sex likes, then in fact you might be the other sex inside. So you better find out whether you are in fact the other sex. So we helped Calvin and Nikki to complain, and when they didn't get anywhere with the school, or the governors, or the CFE education departments, we got their story into the media, and they were thrilled to be interviewed on GB News and to appear in a mainstream newspaper. So that's all part of our ongoing campaign to raise public awareness over this, and also help them to push back against what's happening in their school. So this is an example of some of the consequences that we believe are flowing from teaching these things to children. So this slide shows a ballooning of the number of young people identified as bisexual since 2014. So you can see that there's been, in that period of time, in just under 10 years, a near tripling. So we're thankful that the government has decided to have a review of sex education in schools, something that's sorely needed. And so this is something that we need to pray into. And I'd ask you to do that, to pray that the government would see that actually this material is on way too far. So the second area is the area of pride. You might have noticed that the month that was formerly known as June has been renamed. And in the last couple of years, many schools, including primary schools, have started to start celebrating Pride at school. And Pride is, of course, an inherently political movement. Peter Tatchell has called it political activism with a carnival-like atmosphere. It celebrates, in fact, the Stonewall riots of 1969. And it's important to understand that this isn't actually by the school leadership for her stand. So CLC helped her to sue the school for discrimination. Unfortunately, the judge didn't see things her way, and her claim was dismissed just earlier this year. But we're bringing that case to appeal because we think it was wrongly decided. So watch this space. So my third area is transgenderism. So one of the consequences of the secularization of party, and Steve has already alluded to this, is confusion about identity. With no recognition of the creator, our young people are encouraged to be encouraged to decide themselves to work out who they are, even whether they're a boy or a girl. And our cultures try all the time to break down boundaries, not least in this area of sex and gender. And the notion of gender fluidity is popular and is encroaching in many areas of life. If you've got concern about it and you're brave enough to raise concerns in the workplace or at school, you're likely to be punished. So this is Nigel and Sally Rowe. And they raised concerns about what was going on in the local CMU primary school 4 years ago, because there was another child aged 6 in their son's class who was allowed to come to school one day dressed as a boy, one day dressed as a girl. And they were concerned about the impact on their own children as well as the other children in their class, and also obviously the child themselves. So Christian Legal Centre helped them to take the Department of Education to court in a kind of case. It's called a judicial review. And we gained permission to do this after a lot of work and a contested hearing. We decided to leave it at that and leave the actual decision hanging, in that we didn't know which way it would go. But it was a significant victory to just get the right to have that case heard. So this all really matters because puberty very often provides a natural cure to gender confusion, probably in more than 88% of cases. So we shouldn't be locking children into this impasse before puberty, but rather help to manage their feelings and accept their sex bodies. So I just wanted, my fourth area, I just want to introduce you to a few of our teachers who are fighting these battles on the ground. So the first one is Bernard Randall. He's a committed teacher and a member of the clergy of the Church of England. And he was sacked from his role as a school chaplain after a sermon which had a heavy emphasis on tolerating one another, but which told children they must make up their own minds about LGBT+ ideology. Although it was actually very anodyne kind of sermon. And as I say, the heavy emphasis on tolerating everybody, respecting everybody, his words were considered offensive and, quote, harmful. And in this culture, he'd gone too far. So his fight with us is going on, and his case is going to be in front of his tribunal, hopefully within the next year. So then we've got Hannah. She's a primary teacher. And she was sacked after challenging school policy that involved unquestioning affirmation of a 7-year-old child as the other sex at school, and a total silencing around the situation by the head, within the school and amongst the parents and the children. It also required everyone, including all the other children, to go along with the fact that this girl had become a boy. With our help, she raised safeguarding concerns with persuasive expert evidence of potential harm right through to the governments and the local authority. Then she challenged the policy in court by way of a judicial review. As a result of all of that, she was sacked and reported to the Teaching Regulatory Authority for an confidentiality. Although her name, the name of the school, the child's name, were kept anonymous throughout. This is a very important case because it goes straight to the heart of how prepubescent children exhibiting gender distress should best be helped. And Hannah, as with all of the minds, is motivated by her faith. She believes that we were created male and female and that girls cannot become boys. She was seriously concerned for the welfare of the child concerned and felt unable to be implicit in what was going on. It's a privilege to help her and walk alongside her. So, Joshua Sutcliffe. That picture I was taking it from the front of the Telegraph magazine one weekend. He was recently struck off the role of teachers after a chain of events, starting with the Bible club that he started in the Catholic school where he worked as a maths teacher. And he had a professional disciplinary hearing when the Teaching Regulation Authority brought proceedings against him. And there was a great emphasis in that case on his so-called misgendering of a 15-year-old girl who wished to be treated as a boy. And then, lastly, Christy Hicks. She lost her job as a teaching assistant in a primary school for sharing a post on Facebook warning parents about material promoting transgenderism that was being used in the reception year in the school where she worked. There's an ongoing legal battle for justice for her, which has also reached the Employment Appeal Tribunal. So that gives you an idea of some of the kinds of cases that we're dealing with at the moment. And what about your legal rights as parents? What can you do if you're unhappy with the material being delivered in your child's school? So in the last few years, the government has introduced new regulations making relationships education mandatory in primary schools, and what they call relationships and sex education mandatory in secondary schools. And this is what I was alluding to before, and saying this has actually led to activists getting into schools and actually delivering this material. So this new thing added to what the existing law was already, and the duties that were already owned by schools. So they're all in area now. So one back to one slide back. So this area of education is now, it's always been named all the time, but in current laws, RSHE, relationships, sex, and health education. So I think what's important to note is that there is in fact no statutory obligation on primary schools to teach sex education at all. So if your child is under 11, there's no obligation on school to teach them sex education. They can, and increasingly they're deciding to do so, but they are not obliged to. But there is an obligation on schools, primary schools, to teach that the legal status of marriage now includes same-sex marriage, and to indicate that, as a result, other legal forms of family now exist as well. But the dividing line between so-called relationships education, which is what I just talked about, types of families, etc., and sex education has become blurred. And you may be thinking to yourself, how can we really talk about other kinds of families without sort of slightly getting into the sex education arena? So inappropriate material has been moved over from the sex education curriculum into the relationships education side, because parents don't have a right to opt out of that. So that's an interesting development. But the overarching statutory framework in the area of parental rights remains very clear. Hopefully you can see that. That's okay. So all sex education must be appropriate, having regard to the age and religious background of the pupils. So, have the next one. So, Section 9 of the Education Act states that when exercising or performing all their powers and duties under the Education Acts, the Department for Education, and by extension schools, shall have regard to the general principle that pupils are to be educated in accordance with the wishes of their parents. And then if we go to the European Convention on Human Rights, Protocol 1 of Article 2 tells us there that in the exercise of any functions which it assumes in relation to education and to teaching, the state, i.e. schools, shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. So I can tell you that you have parent power. So hopefully you've got a sense from that about what your rights are. So it is a legal requirement that schools in England deliver sex education that is age appropriate, takes your Christian faith into account, and neither undermines nor interferes with your ability to raise your children in accordance with your Christian worldview. So this is what we need to hold on to as parents and to bear in mind when we consider the material being pushed onto our children. So how do these parental rights kind of work themselves out? Can I have the next one, please? So your rights in relation to relationships education and RSE kind of work themselves out in two important ways. So the first one is the right of opt-out. So I alluded to this just now. So this is the absolute right to withdraw children from certain lessons. So in the past, there was a nearly unconditional right of withdrawal for children from sex education. There remains an conditional right to withdraw primary children from sex education. But relationships education has become mandatory, as I said, in primary and secondary schools, and there is no right of withdrawal. But the right of withdrawal for sex education is there right up to the age of 16. But your rights under the Human Rights Act and the Education Act that I mentioned before are overarching. And so this means that the government doesn't have a right to prevent you from withdrawing your children from any lessons where the subject matter at hand is such as to proselytize your children on moral issues in a way that infringes on a parent's right to raise their child according to your own religious convictions. So this also applies in secondary schools where sex education is being taught in a particularly dogmatic or aggressive way. So that's the right of opt-out. You also have, and this is very important, I think this is an underused right, this is your right to be consulted. So I said before that the government is obliged to take into account the age and the religious background of the children in the school. So your rights also attach to the content of what is being taught, whether it's mandatory or not. You have a right to be consulted. So the new regulations, the ones that I mentioned that made it a legal requirement, require that all schools have a written policy for relationships education and RSE. So schools are required to consult parents in developing and reviewing those policies. And they should also provide parents with examples of teaching materials they will be using. These are all statutory requirements. So as parents, you are required to be consulted in a meaningful way about your child's curriculum in this area. So you need to be asking the question. The school should write to you and tell you there's going to be sex education being delivered in the next few weeks, and would you like to see material? So you can say, yes, I do, please, and go in and take advantage of the opportunities. Ask them for their policy, and make sure when you are consulted that you respond to consultation. Also ask when was the consultation. If you're not happy with the policy, ask when was the consultation, when did it take place, and make things a bit difficult for them if you're not happy with what's being delivered. So, if your child attends a school with a Christian ethos, like a Church of England school, for example, it is accepted by the guidance, and there's a quote up there from it, that materials can be taught in a manner that does not compromise the Christian ethos of the school. So, that's actually there in the regulations. So schools may heavily promote abstinence, for example, as part of their sex education program, if that's in line with their ethos. So if you're a child in a church in school, are they saying anything about abstinence, or are they just sex positive all the time? So what can you do? So practically speaking, what can you do? So we need to become Issachar people for the sake of our children. The Old Testament tribe of Issachar in 1 Chronicles 12 were the ones who understood the times and therefore knew how Israel should respond. As parents, you are the primary influences over your children. Teach your children the gospel story from their earliest days, and I can see we've got provision for young children on Sunday. You saw it outside your signs. Help them to understand the story that they're past. Pray over them and gently lead them into understanding this as their identity as part of the family of God. And that way you will insulate them against these strange ideas that unfortunately might come to their ears. So these are some examples of things that you could be doing. So I said before about taking advantage of your right to be consulted. So, being engaged, knowing what's going on in your child's school. Don't trust them. To teach your children in this area, make sure that you're keeping an eye on what they're doing. Obviously, a good relationship with the teachers is absolutely essential, and appreciating what they do, and thanking them for things, not always focusing on what they're not doing so well. And so try not to be confrontational and personal. It's good if you can maybe talk to them directly rather than just sending emails. And know what your school policies are. Ask for them. Ask for the complaint policy or not happy, engage with a complaint. And understand what your rights are in terms of law and consultation. Don't be afraid if you don't get what you want. Don't be afraid to escalate it to the head, or even to governors. And while that's talk to Ofsted, local authority, the LADO, and even the Department for Education. Get advice. So yeah, come and see us at the big school, or send us email at the student centre, and we'll help guide you on the best way to approach things. 5 minutes. This is our primary and overarching advice. Bring the issues to our Father God, who cares far more about your children and leading them into truth than you ever could. So our education team, along with the legal team, is working hard to encourage and facilitate the setting up of Christian schools up and down the country. We've talked a bit about that already. But we're also here to help you with providing resources. Maybe you want to start your own school. We'd love that if you want to tell us that you'd like to do that and you want to help. But also we've got all sorts of resources, and in the pack you will see there's a booklet that's particularly about parenting, which I hope you'll find helpful. Please do look at our website as well, and we've got books and leaflets and things at the back, and Hannah and Charlotte will give you those. If you'd like to take them, please do take them. So just finally, just to remind ourselves that this is a spiritual battle, isn't it? We represent a big remnant who stand up for truth, whatever the cost, and there will be a cost, there's no doubt about it. But we pray, we trust our Father God with our precious children. So we'd really like you to invite you to become part of our community that is Christian Concern if you're not already. If you take a photo of that slide, and that gives you a link into signing up for what is a weekly email that we send out, giving you information and ideas on how to take action, and just letting you know about what's happening and just engaging you. So we'd love you to sign up if you haven't done that already. Thank you so much for listening. Steve and I will endeavour to answer your questions now. I think you've got a piece of paper. If you want to write questions onto, you can do that, or you can just ask them. I think someone's going to be going around with the microphone. Thank you. Thank you so much.